Welcome to Fresh Start Podcast. I'm Dave Henning, and today my guest is Tom Gerencer, who is a journalist, content writer, editor, teacher, author, and you have done some wild and crazy things in your life, Tom. And thank you for being with me. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dave. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm excited that you've had so many interesting things that you've done. You're a regular contributor to HP Tech Takes, Boy's Life. I remember that famous magazine, scouting articles in the Boston Globe magazine, Outdoor Life, and a lot more. So very interesting. And but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your background. You like a lot of people that I've talked to, you've come from a place where you had to, make some decisions, make some changes in your life. And that's been very interesting. We discussed this a little bit. So if you don't mind sharing, Tom, would you say is the lowest point in your life that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, I like that your show is called the Fresh Start Podcast. I certainly did need a fresh start. I actually became kind of arrogant initially, which is what led to this. And I lived up in Maine, and I had a great video production business up there that did very well. And I did some wedding videos and some corporate videos, and I started thinking, I could have a career anywhere. I could do almost anything. So I started getting arrogant, and I decided, well, what's missing from my life? And it was that I didn't live somewhere that I really wanted to. Maine is a beautiful place. It's absolutely wonderful. But I wanted to be able to do like whitewater kayaking year round, and I had all these other ideas. So I thought, well, I'll go around the country and I'll find someplace cool that I want to live, and I'll just live there and I'll just work there. So what ended up happening is I ended up diving on West Virginia. It has some of the best whitewater in the country. My wife and I moved there, and we actually got married there, but we were both from Maine, and ended up not being able to make it work. I couldn't make it happen, and I kept burning through my savings that I had amassed from this great video production business that I ran for 8 years, and then ended up in a very dark place where I had to come to grips with the reality that I was not going to be able to make a living in West Virginia in any way, and somehow got this job where I was writing. It was 10,500 words a week of published copy, which was it was a lot of work for not that much money. And my boss at the time, told me that I was lucky to have this job, and I said, well, I guess I am. It was $40,000 a year. I had a child on the way, and then we had our first child. I was 47 years old. He was a year old, and I lost that job. And, at that point, that was probably the darkest point in my life when I was 47 years old, just lost my job, a 1-year-old son or a 2-year-old son, another son on the way, and didn't have any means of income, and was just absolutely, it's a little hard to talk about, but I at this point, my marriage, I felt like was really not going well at all. That's an understatement. I felt like a bad father. I felt like a bad human being. My career had completely dead-ended. And, both my parents had died some years before. I had lost a brother some years before that. Everything just seemed hopeless to me. It didn't look like there was any way up out of this career-wise or in any aspect of my life. Everything seemed like it was never going to get better. It was the darkest point in my life. And so there's your answer. That was not fun.
You did pick, as you said, a most beautiful area. I've been through West Virginia many times, I-77 north and south up to the family in Ohio, and it is a gorgeous place. And my wife and I actually did some cross-country skiing. Is it called Snowshoe Mountain in West Virginia?
You got it.
Oh, my gosh.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful place.
And we get up there right after a blizzard, and the parking lot to park our car was like 4 feet of snow. So, but nevertheless, this is your story, not mine. And so here you are. You made this decision to come to a beautiful area, fantastic whitewater rafting, all of the four seasons, and but your economy and your family situation just wasn't working out. So, how in the world did you end up escaping this low point in your lifetime?
Well, it's it's tough for me to talk about God because I'm a business writer. I have this professional career where I help companies, and it seems almost like God is kind of a taboo subject today in many ways, sadly. But it seems like that, which is crazy, right? Because if you look at the statistics, it's somewhere around 90% of the people in this country believe in God. So it's crazy that it's such a taboo subject, but it is. With that being said, I tried everything to fix my situation. I mean, I consider myself a fairly intelligent person. Back when I got arrogant, I considered myself a very intelligent person. I thought, I can do anything. I can make this work in West Virginia, and I couldn't. And I had tried everything. And what finally got me out of it was going back to church. I didn't do that for me. I did it for my kids. My faith was actually fairly weak, but I wanted to raise my children going to church because that's the way I was raised, and I thought it was a good thing. And I sadly I didn't have a strong faith, but it grew as I started going to church with my kids. My faith started getting stronger and stronger. And I started praying this prayer at some time. I started saying, I can't do it without you, God. I can't do this without you, God. One of the best things I realized it was a horrible time of my life that I went through, but it had this really great realization, which is that when you consider yourself to be very resourceful and very smart, and you get into a situation where you cannot make that situation work, then I was forced to come to terms with this idea that, hey, I can't do this. As smart as I've thought I am for the past, 47 years of my life, I've run into a situation that I absolutely cannot fix. I've looked in every corner of this situation and tried to fix it, and there absolutely is no solution whatsoever. And I started thinking about, maybe death is the solution that will come to me. Maybe that will be the solution. But I realized, well, that's not going to be a solution either. And then I was faced with this realization: there just is no way out of this situation for me. There's no solution. And when that hits you really hard, and you have to come to terms with that as an arrogant person who's always been very self-sufficient, it's a blessing, because then you realize, well, maybe there's somebody else who this isn't impossible for. This is an impossible situation, but maybe it's not. It's impossible for me. It's impossible for anybody who you put him in my situation, but maybe there's somebody else who this isn't impossible for. And that was a great realization. That hit me like a ton of bricks. Like that's why I started saying, I can't do this without you, God. I just can't. And when I started saying that, it was almost magical, because when I started praying that, everything sort of started to change. Not sort of started to change, it deeply started to change. My career started flourishing. Like I said, I had this editor tell me I was lucky to be making $40,000 a year working from home and working from West Virginia, and I believed him. But now, where I am now, I'm reluctant to share exact dollar figures, but where I am now, that number was absolutely ridiculous. That he was saying, you're lucky, you're highly paid for a writer. That was absolutely ridiculous. It's not in any way, shape, or form true. And then, now in the middle of this pandemic, all the writers I know were telling me, hey, work is drying up. Nobody's hiring anybody. It's, we're losing all our clients. And then that hit me as well. I lost 75% of my income in one day in the pandemic. And again, I thought, my first thought was, what am I going to do? I'm going to be back down where I was. And then I said, hey, I can't do this without you, God. It's not that I didn't try. I tried my best. I'm not into the Jesus take the wheel sort of theory of things.
Right.
I feel like, of course, God helps those who help themselves, right? Look at the parable. There's that parable of the three servants where the master goes away and says, I'm going to give you each some money. And, I won't get into that, but I'm sure your listeners know it and your viewers know it. But, God, from my reading of it, God wants people to try hard. Doesn't want people to sit back and say, you take care of it, God. So I tried very hard, but I was also honest that, this is another impossible situation. I can't, in the middle of this pandemic when work is drying up like crazy, I can't replace this 75% of my income by myself. I can try very hard. I know lots of strategies, but in the end, it's going to be up to God. And I sort of, again, just admitted that, look, I can't do this without you, God. And a couple of hours after that happened, and after I said that, I got a phone call out of the blue from somebody that I knew as an acquaintance that I knew through my association. And she said, hey, would you like to write a book for the Discovery Channel? And I said, yes, I would. So she put me in touch with her agent, and her agent said, spoke to me on the phone for 20 minutes and said, I think you're perfect. And it was this bizarre, I won't get into the details, but it was this bizarre, they needed a writer who could do like XYZ, like really disparate things that just happened to be me. Now, it's great. I was the perfect person to write this book, but I could never in a million years have found that client who needed this book, who needed this exact type of writer, somebody with manufacturing experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up writing this book. And then after that, I said, well, this is going to dry up. After the book is done, that's going to be over. And what will I do then? Well, again, I can't do it without you, God. Well, my business now is better than it was before I lost that 75% of the income at the start of the pandemic lockdown. It just continues to grow, and that's kind of where I am now. It's an astounding journey that I've gone on. But again, it all came out of just, first of all, starting to go back to church because I wanted my kids to be there. And then realizing, wow, I'm in this horrible situation that I can't solve. I'll try my hardest, but I can't do it without God. And just making that admission, and then things started to happen.
Well, it's obviously very ironic that you should say that, as we discussed. I, on purpose, named my company and my podcast the Fresh Start Podcast, Fresh Start, because it seems like everybody, or so many of us, especially the entrepreneurs and the business owners that I've spoken with, the freelancers, you're out there on the proverbial limb, so to say, at the very end of the limb, waiting for it to snap off. And yet, as we take the situation we're given at this moment, and we have this, we pivot, or we have this mental shift, and as you mentioned, there is an external source, let's say, that enters in, especially if you're a person of faith. That is a resource, and it's interesting that you got an offer to write a book for the Discovery Channel because you discovered some really amazing things in your life as you let go. You were saying that you went through this time of being arrogant, and of course, I was probably an arrogant teenager, because when I was a teenager, you see, I knew everything. but now that I'm older, I realize exactly how much I don't know. So this thing of faith, and you've allowed that to grow and to mature in your life. Is that right? And then how did that affect? Obviously, financial stress is the number one reason for divorce in the country, and separation, right, and a lot of other issues. Right. But how did this shift for you, and turning it over, really releasing it, letting, hands open, letting go, and letting God enter into it? How did that affect your marriage?
Oh, it affected it in a big way, because, for so long again, it's hard to talk about myself personally because I've got this business career, but I'm going to do it. I mean, I was blowing up yelling at my wife once every few months, just losing control, not doing anything physical, but just yelling and screaming and getting very upset. And it was not a good, we were having these big long fights and everything was horrible. And, letting go in that area as well was like, well, there's lots of things I can do, but it just seems like there's nothing that's going to work. And then the letting God handle that part of it was more like, asking God to grant me peace and compassion and understanding and love, not love, incoming love, but love that I can give. Starting to ask for that, and then just starting to say, well, I don't need to be kind of ruminating in my head, when I get one of these problems or one of these big fights would happen, or something that would have caused a fight in the past, I would again say, I can't do this without you, God. I can't. I've tried everything I know to fix the situation, and I can't. So I'm not going to, which funnily enough, there's a great book called Why We Snap, where the author explains, like, and I can't think of the author's name, but he just goes through all these case studies of people who went postal, a quiet man who kept to himself, and then one day standing in line at the post office, or driving in the car, just snapped and killed somebody. And this person in this book, he explains that through all these case studies, he explains that, well, what actually happens, and there's a lot of research behind this, it's not that you can't control your temper if you get to a point where you lose your temper. It's not that you need to learn, how do I control my temper? Because once you get to that point, nothing you're going to do is going to control your temper. It's in the quiet moments where you're washing the dishes and you're thinking, I can't believe she said that to me. What right does she have to talk to me like that? It's those moments are when you're adding a little more weight to the side of the scale, and you're adding a little more weight, and eventually it's going to tip over, and you're going to lose control of your temper. So just in those moments where I would think, I would be washing the dishes, and I would think, well, how can I, why did you say this to me, or how can I get out of this situation? That's the moment when I needed to say, okay, I can't do this without you, God. I'm not going to be able to solve this issue. I'm just going to have to turn that one over. And that was very calming. And that has resulted in, no more of these big blowouts and no more of these 3-day fights, and a much better marriage now, and a much better situation for my children as well, because they don't have to be watching this kind of thing going on. They get to see a more calm and reasoned, thing going on, interaction going on in relationship.
It's all about it's all about communication, as you said, and you made a very, very valid point about talking about your personal life, because we are taught as business people, it seems like, that we in our business we don't talk religion or politics. However, you're talking about a relationship situation, a relationship with God, as opposed to religion per se. And it had a profound effect on you. One of the few things I remember from college along the line of what you're talking about, communication, was this principle called Pendulum Drift. If you can imagine a grandfather clock and the pendulum going back and forth, and the concept is she makes a comment, oh yeah, you make a comment, oh yeah. And so somebody has to stop the pendulum.
Right.
And so I've never forgotten that little visual of marriage relationships, or just relationship conversations, and how they can rapidly get out of control if you're not careful. But having said that, did you already talk about where did you find your faith? Like waiting at the back door, or?
Yeah, and by the way, that's a great image, that pendulum drift. I hope that sticks in my head. That's beautiful. Said somebody's got to reach out and stop it, otherwise it will just keep going back and forth. So years ago, before my father died, about a year before he died of a series of about 12 strokes in 1 year, which was terrible. But back before he died, a year before he had his first stroke, or actually several months before he had his first stroke, I asked him if he was happy for some reason. I don't remember why. And his answer shocked me. He instantly said yes. And he didn't even have to think about it. There was no pause. There was no qualification. He just said yes. There was no, well, yeah, but, and I said, but Dad, I don't mean to be negative or anything, but you've lost your wife, you've lost 2 sons, you're from a family of 12, and most of them are dead. You've lost, I can't even think how many close friends in your years. How can you be happy? And he said, a big part of it is, I do the things I want to do. I don't think about I don't dwell on things that bother me. I do a lot of things I want to do with people I want to do them. But he said, the biggest thing is my faith. And that bothered me because I never had a very strong faith. I always had a faith, but it was never, it wasn't strong enough where it would cause that kind of joy in me. And I didn't understand that. And I didn't understand it until more recently when I started going back to church with my sons. And I started kind of building this, kind of thinking of my father's faith as the goal. So we had this great priest in West Virginia here named Father Das, and he just going to his sermons and through thinking about faith more and thinking about my father's faith more, I realized, faith isn't something that you just have like brown eyes or brown hair. It's something that it's like a garden. You can build it. You have to grow it and work on it. And so I started realizing, well, if I don't have that kind of faith that my father had, that seemed to help him so much, maybe I could get it. Maybe it's not hopeless for me. Maybe it's not just like, well, I don't believe strongly enough, so I'm not going to be able to ask for God's help, and that's just not. I'm just going to be in trouble when I get in trouble. That's it. But so I started realizing that there were certain things I could do, and I started doing them. And I'll just kind of a random list. It's reading the Bible. And there's a great book, by the way, Reading the Bible. I never realized, because even though I grew up Catholic and went to church every Sunday until I was 18, I never understood the Bible is like 10 Harry Potter books long. It's incredible. I never knew that. I never tried to read it. So when I would try to read it here and there, and I would say, oh, it's so boring, and it's so, I'm not getting anywhere. Like when I look at the progress, I'm like, I'm not. And then I realized, well, it's because it's 10 books long. It's massive. It's not just a book. It's a collection of books. And you have to kind of know, where do I go? There's a great article is it Montana State University? The link is web.mst.edu. Well, I'm not going to be able to do the whole length, but if you Google how should I read the Bible, or in what order should I read the Bible, it's the first thing that comes up from Montana State University, from I believe a pastor there. But he explains, like, there's a certain order, and he's got this article where he says, like, here, if you're new to it, here's where you should start, and here's what you should read first. So that's fantastic. And then also other things that the Bible and that church in general recommends that have helped me very much are going to church, because that'll, as boring as that sounds, that really the pastor's sermons really started to make me realize, like, here's how to build this faith. Also, meditation has been massive. Fasting, which you wouldn't think, who wants to not eat, but that is incredibly helpful. There's a ton of research behind it, how it helps spiritually, yes, but physically and mentally as well. I mean, I had Lyme disease. I suffered from Lyme disease for a couple of years and tried, again, everything to try to fix it. Went to a doctor up in Maine, and because they know Lyme disease up there, they understand it. But all the drugs and everything weren't beating it, and then fasting beat it. Intermittent fasting, just not eating breakfast, skipping breakfast, actually was what finally kicked my symptoms out the door. And then charity, not. Again, these all sounded to me like these outmoded concepts from this archaic book that, you should be charitable. But then, our priest, Father Das, he explained, it's not about giving money. If you have money and you can give it, great. that's important. If you don't have money, but that's where I would always run into problems is, well, I don't have enough money to give to charity. Maybe when I start making more money, I can do that. But he explained, no, if you have even like a half hour a day, you can give, or a half hour a week, pardon me, you can give of your time. And I started doing that, and that it makes you feel great. There's also a ton of research on that. It's good for your health. It helps you live longer. It makes you happier. And I've experienced it now. I didn't understand that back then, but I wrote this book called "I Can't Do It Without You, God," where I look at the science behind charity as well and how that helps you. I didn't look into that when I started it. I just did it because Father Das said, well, you should be doing this. And I was like, wow, this makes me feel amazing. It makes me feel like I have this strong relationship with God that I never felt before, that now I have confidence when I say, I can't do this without you, God. I have a lot more confidence. God loves us anyway, whether we do charity or not, but it just helped me to have more confidence that I feel like I deserve God's help because I'm doing this charity work. And I feel, even without that, it just made me feel great. And there are little ways, like once I started looking for ways, like, well, how do I don't know how to help anybody. What am I supposed to do? Go to a blood bank and volunteer for a blood drive? That's more than half an hour. But I started thinking like, well, how can I help people? And there are little ways that I felt like once I started paying attention, there were little ways that God was tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you have a skill that you can go help people. I write for a resume site. I'm a certified professional resume writer. I have all these people all the time messaging me and saying, can you help me write my resume? People from like Pakistan and developing countries. And I would just say, I don't have time. I'm so busy. And then I started saying, well, why don't I have half an hour a week to help somebody like that to write a resume? And it's been transformational for me. But so there are all these little ways that, between reading the Bible and meditation and fasting and charity and asking God for, can you give me peace? Can you give me love to give to other people? Can you give me hope and faith and compassion and understanding for other people? Those kind of prayers, just all those things can have helped me find this much stronger faith now that's helping me in immeasurable ways.
So you described faith as more like growing a garden. So what I hear you saying is that you can go over to Home Depot and buy some Miracle Grow.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And of course, see, that's also a part of growing your faith. It's my calling is to make you laugh. So I've accomplished. Let me check that off my checklist here.
You have a gift.
But you wrote a book, I Can't Do It Without You, God. It reminds me, I keep saying this because I actually read it one time, a long time ago, Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. And when you attach purpose to these things that you're doing anyway, that's a fantastic thing. And you pointed out 5 things that the good priest said: the Bible, church, meditation, fasting, and charity. And look, you and I know we're not always consistent on all these things, and it's not like, oh, if I just do a checklist of all this formula, then the boom, the magic and the miracles happen. No, it's really a matter of the heart. Really doing it out of gratefulness for all of our blessings. And interesting though, you were talking about, I have my business mindset and my personal faith mindset. And yet I would share with you very realistically, a lot of the friends of mine and other people that I've met that are very successful business people monetarily and successfully in life, so many of them really have a personal faith that we're talking about, the same kind of personal faith. And they've gotten around to thinking, I can share this and it's going to be okay. And so I appreciate, Tom, you sharing what's going on in your life. And can anyone have this kind of a career in life? We're the guys that are out there. We've taken this route of being, paid as consultants or on commission, or we're freelancers. And it's a huge risk because, as you said, we don't know where the next dime is coming from necessarily.
Yeah.
And yet, so can anyone have this kind of a career in life as you've over these years have developed for yourself?
Well, yeah. You, Dave, know better than anybody that anybody can. But there's a lot of hard work involved, and that's a big question, right now with the pandemic going on, and a lot of people being moved out of. There's that great book, "Someone Moved My Cheese." A lot of people's cheese
Oh
has
yeah,
moved all at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's suddenly like there's a whole warehouse of cheese has moved, but absolutely right. There's anybody can have a great freelancing career. There's a lot of hard work to it, as you know, but it's just kind of like that. I can't think of the book, but there's this great business book and career book where he talks about the flywheel effect. Can you think of the book I'm thinking of, or? But
no.
Anyway, it's the idea that when you first start, it's like impossible to get this big heavy wheel moving. But as you start working at it, and you start trying, well, maybe I can make a little bit of money at this, and you start trying it, the flywheel starts to move, and after a while, it's almost hard to get it stopped. It's just like things start rolling really well. But also, on top of the hard work, it's also just admitting that you can't do it. You can't. You're not in control. You can do everything you can possibly do, and like you said, there's no checklist. It's more, it's more just seeing. Well, this thing works. I think I'll pick this up, and this thing works. So I think I'll add this in, and not being afraid to ask God for help with just about everything. I for the longest time I was like, well, I better not pray about that. That's so minor. God doesn't want to be bothered with that. But there's that parable of the unjust judge, where there was this woman who would go to this unjust judge and ask, like, can you give me justice? And he would say no every day. But she kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And finally the judge said, just to get rid of you, yes, I'm going to help you. And if God, if that unjust judge would do that, how much more likely is God to help us? And God is infinite, has infinite resources. So why not ask for help with everything?
So I think there's a biblical term for that. It's called the "stop bugging me" prayer.
Right. And of course, it's not the only prayer you want to do, but of course, the best one is what Jesus said. It's the Our Father is the best prayer. But
yes,
at the same time, the "stop bugging me" prayer it's okay. God's not going to be like, you need to stop praying because you're really bothering. God's happy. I feel like God is happy to listen to every prayer we have. So
absolutely. And even in our darkest times, I found comfort in this course of my life because my father died very young when I was 22 years old of a heart attack up in Rochester. And I've been through a lot of experiences which I won't go into, but I found comfort in knowing that the Apostle Paul once said, God who comforts the depressed comforts me. So, in the Christian world, as it were, there was a time when it was not great to admit that you had emotions, deep emotions, despair, depression, discouragement. And yet, if the great Apostle Paul can say that in all of his travels and stuff, certainly we can admit at times that, as you mentioned, basically just what you said, God, I can't do this. I need you.
Yeah. That's a great, I had not heard that. God, I think I had heard it years ago, but I've forgotten it. But God who comforts the depressed comforts me. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of those letters, one of those letters he wrote. He wrote a lot of letters.
Right.
Good letter writer, except he had a secretary who was assistant, wrote that stuff. Anyway. Oh, well, listen, Tom, where can people find your book? Number one, I can't do it without you, God. Where can people find that?
Well, it's in the publication process right now. It's not out. It's not out yet, but that's part of doing this podcast is building up the clout to be able to get that published. But I hope to have it published soon. And I've got another book. I've written, like I said, other books before. One for the Discovery Channel and one on search engine optimization for the business world. But that one, I really hope to get that one published quite soon. And I have an agent who says that it's the right time for it for sure. So.
Absolutely,
I think
absolutely.
a lot of people are thinking about going back to faith right now. It's kind of maybe a silver lining to the pandemic, where people are a lot of people are going to be realizing, I can't make all this work on my own. I need some help. Not that anybody would ever wish a pandemic on anybody, and not that it's not a good thing in any way. But maybe this is the right time for that book. So.
I would have to totally agree with you that there is a lot happening in the spiritual world, and this would be a great time for people to return to their faith or discover that there is such a thing as faith. Either way, but I want to also especially look up that Montana study that you mentioned, Montana State University study on how to read the Bible. That's a very interesting topic. And before we wrap things up here, Tom, it's been great being with you, number one. But secondly, do you have a particular website that we could share, or that you would like us to refer people to?
I do. It's tomgerencer.com, TOMGERENCER.com. That's my website. Watch that space for the book to come out. I can't do it without you, God. And also just my LinkedIn page. I don't know if there's a way to it's just just look on LinkedIn for Tom Gerencer. I think I'm one of two. The other one is my cousin from Michigan, and he's a fire chief, I think. But
okay, so if you want to learn about fire trucks, get a hold of your cousin.
That's right.
Or if you want to learn how to put the fire out in your life and build a new kind of fire of faith in your life, then go to tomgerencer.com, right?
You have a gift with words.
And so, Tom, by the way, speaking of LinkedIn, you need to accept that friend request I just sent you, number one. And then and then number two, this YouTube talk that we're having right now will actually appear on LinkedIn in the next few days. So I hope that helps you out. My whole purpose in doing this is literally to help small business owners, to help freelancers, and to help our community at large with these issues that we like to discuss about our personal lives and how, hey, it's okay to be real, right?
Yeah, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's such a generous and kind project that you have going here.
Well, I might have mentioned this in one of my other podcasts, but I'll tell you in case you hadn't heard, is that I found this particular software a year ago, and I had a nice little podcast built up with some of my previous material and my How to Become a Barnabas Leader, number one bestseller on Amazon book a long time ago. But right before Christmas, God does this to me. He kind of whispered in my ear, "Hey, Dave, what are you doing that podcast I gave you?" Oh, okay. I probably should do something. So I've really ramped up getting in touch with people, inviting people to be interviewed on my podcast. And I hope that's a blessing to somebody for that we have both touched today with our conversation here, Tom. So I really thank you again, and are grateful for you considering being on my podcast. Someone as famous and important as you in West Virginia.
No, I don't take credit for that at all. I don't identify with famous at all.
But we could talk for hours. You have so many interesting things that we could discuss. So maybe we'll make a series out this somewhere down the road. But let's get that book out there, Tom, because I'm anxious to read it, to share it, and I think that everybody should be ready to get a hold of that book once you have it published. So I Can't Do It Without You, God, by Tom Gerencer from somewhere in downtown West Virginia.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Dave. It's been really fun talking to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom.